Hi guys, my name's Ben.
And I'm Holly.
We scaled our rent-to-rent business from 0 to 20k profit per month in less than 18 months, and that changed our lives.
We went from working 9 to 5 jobs, living the same day every single day, living paycheck to paycheck. We were lucky enough to have jobs that we both enjoy, but that didn't change the fact that we were stressed through the week, living for the weekends, and had maybe one holiday a year. We were able to spend a couple of days per week working from home, and that did feel like a bit of freedom in comparison to working from the office every single day, but we knew we wanted more.
Now, we've both always wanted to have our own business so that we could live our lives on our own terms. We wanted that freedom to do what we wanted when we wanted and not have anyone to answer to. We wanted to go on holidays without having to put in requests for annual leave. We really wanted to create a business that would generate money whilst we got to spend time doing the things that we really wanted to do.
Now we get to live our dream life. We get to go on holiday whenever we want. We live where we've always wanted to live. Ben's bought his dream car, and we get to also treat our family, which we absolutely love to do. We get to spend our days doing what we enjoy, and for us, that's not having to set an alarm for a morning commute. It's going to the gym or doing a mid-morning Pilates session, or even going for brunch with our dog Richie, just because we fancy it. All whilst the business is making money.
We really didn't think that this life was possible, and it was all that we ever dreamed of when we were working our 9 to 5s and we were stuck in the office with little to no time for ourselves. The reason why we filmed this video was because we want more people like us and people like you to achieve the same freedom that we've now got.
Right now, you probably feel trapped in a job you don't love, living paycheck to paycheck, and thinking, is this really what my life looks like?
Maybe you really want to get into property right now, but you don't have the cash, knowledge, or time. Or maybe you're working long hours, commuting, and wondering how to escape. That's exactly why we've created the Freedom Through Rent to Rent formula. Because when we started, we needed a proven system that would allow us to quit our jobs without massive startup costs, years of experience, or long work days.
We launched our rent-to-rent business with only £3,000, and that made a £1,000 profit per month.
We then scaled up, and today we're now making £20,000 profit every single month.
And in this video, we're going to break it all down for you, step by step, so you can start today.
We knew that we needed a business model that didn't require tons of time, loads of upfront costs, and years of experience or a fancy degree. That's exactly why we've created a 3-step system which makes rent-to-rent simple, repeatable, and scalable.
First, we're going to show you exactly how you can find properties in high demand areas that are going to be fully booked all the time.
Secondly, we're going to show you how to negotiate with landlords so that they would rather sublet to you than a long-term tenant.
And thirdly, how to make your property look amazing so you can charge prices like these, keeping on average 1 to 2k profit for yourselves.
So that's exactly how we do it, and we rinse and repeat this strategy to scale up to where we are now. So firstly, what we want to be doing is finding properties in a high demand, high value area. So when you're first getting started, and this is if you've got maybe one property or none at this current point, and what you want to be doing is looking for areas within a 1-hour drive of where you live. Now, this isn't a necessity, but we recommend doing it. It's certainly how we did it when we first got started. And we think it's best to do it this way because you can be really hands-on then. You can learn all about the systems and processes that go into running your first few units before you start to go further afield and have those things in place. So that's what we recommend. We think that you should find up to 3 focus areas within a 1-hour drive of where you live. So if you can do that and highlight 3 areas, and it doesn't just have to be like big cities, it could be towns, villages. If you're aware of things that are going on, and you should be because it's within 1 hour of where you live, if you know that a particular village has a huge tourism trend, for example, you could look at properties there, you could explore that area. If you do have a town that maybe has a huge industrial site or business park or something like that, and you know that there's a lot of business going on over there, then you could potentially look at that as a focus area. So that's what we do. It doesn't always have to be these big cities. That's a bit of a misconception with this model. It does work absolutely everywhere, and even in rural areas. A few of our students so far have picked up properties in rural areas because that's where they live, and they know that area really well, and they know that it does really well on tourism. So be open-minded with this and look at areas that are nearby within a 1 hour radius of where you are. So touching on the business side, the tourism side, contractors, things like that, when you are searching at and looking for these focus areas, ideally there wants to be a nice mix of all of them, but I appreciate there's going to be areas like a small village might just be purely tourism. However, it's not a bad thing. If it is purely just tourism, that's great. You can actually have decent occupancy levels just based off tourists. Of course, you're catering towards more shorter stays, so between 5 nights a week, that sort of thing, or weekends. If it's a business district or it's a contractor heavy area, then you're going to be looking at longer stays and slightly different accommodation needs. So it's really about understanding the balance of the particular focus area. An absolute ideal would be having a nice mix of business and leisure. That means that you can fill it with business guests throughout the week and have leisure guests on a weekend and paying a slightly higher nightly rate. So that's an ideal world, but it's not always the case, okay? But you can make money in specific areas and sectors. So don't get caught up in, oh, does it have a perfect mix of everything? It can be solely one, and you can focus on that and make the property appeal to that specific market. Or you can be a little bit more open-ended and try to attract a larger audience of different sectors. So yeah, so you want to try and find a property that appeals to the needs of that audience. So if you're going down a contractor route, this might be a case where there's a lot of projects happening in a specific area, and you'll have contractors coming in from companies, and they'll send a group of 5, 10, 15 guys to one area. They want to try and maximize their budget with the accommodation spend that they've got. So you'll try and squeeze as many people into one property as possible. So that will work out for a contractor market, for example, whereas with tourism, complete different kettle of fish. You want to be offering a really comfy, really cozy environment. You want it to be spacious, and you want to think about the needs that a tourist would have. And so it's a complete different accommodation that you want to be providing. So once you've found your 3 focus areas that are within a 1 hour drive of where you live, you want to use a tool called DNA. Now this is a website, so it's airdna.co, I believe, or you can just Google it. On there is a page called, I believe, Airbnb Profit Calculator. So what you pop in there is the address, so the location, and then you can search different property types. So you could search a 1-bed, a 2-bed, 3-bed, how many bathrooms it's got, and how many guests you can accommodate there. That will look at figures based off other Airbnbs in the area. So it'll give you an average occupancy rate, it will give you an average nightly rate, and it will give you an annual projected revenue. So you can use these numbers to understand, firstly, is this a good area for me to even look at? So that is the first thing that we do. Now, when you are looking at these figures, you want to be taking it with a little pinch of salt. We say that because there's other places where bookings come in. So Airbnb is the main one, everyone knows it, it's a household name. Booking.com is another really popular one. However, with AirDNA, it doesn't take statistics off of Booking.com. So there's a huge drop there and a huge market where it's missing information from. And what happens is when you get, as you may know, when you get a rent-to-rent or an Airbnb, you will put it on different platforms. You'll take bookings directly. It'll be Airbnb, Booking.com, and a few others as well. So not all the information is found through Airbnb. So you've got to take these figures with a pinch of salt. Ideally, it wants to be 50% and above. So that's essentially saying that the website saying that you are going to get 50% of your bookings through Airbnb. You'll be topped up from Booking.com and direct and things like that. So 50% is good. Anything above that is better. It usually comes out, for a decent area that we've found and we've invested in, it usually comes around 60 to 70%. That for me is a green light, and I'd go ahead and start looking at or expanding my research in that area. What you can also do, so that's first port of call is AirDNA. The next thing that we would do is then go to Airbnb. So we'd go to Airbnb, we'd pull up the map and we'd search off the map that area and see what comes up. Look at how many properties are appearing. Now, Airbnb search results won't show every single property. It uses a very clever algorithm. So not everything's going to come up. You're not going to see every single property in that area. However, it will give you a very good indication because there'll just be prices popping up absolutely everywhere. So look at that, see what type of properties are coming up. If there's a bit of a gap and you're seeing properties that don't have professional images, they don't have the best reviews, that sort of thing, but there's a lot of them, that's a really, really good sign, because if you can come in with a product that is shiny and polished and well refined, then you're going to be best set up for a high occupancy rate and a high nightly rate. At the end of the day, people want to stay in nice places. And so that would be a really good sign. The next thing that I would do whilst in Airbnb is I would then go into specific properties and I'd look at ones that are sort of average, not super high end, not super low end. I'd look at that average range and I click in and I go to their calendar as if I was searching for dates for my booking, and I would see how much of their calendar is booked up and how far in advance. Now, we tend to find in a lot of locations that we've invested in that the market is really last minute. So you'll only see bookings for sort of 4 to 6 weeks in advance. So don't worry if you don't see calendars booked up for 3 months in advance. For most of the UK, it doesn't work like that. In some rural areas and for some specific properties, like really large ones and things like that, it will do. They'll be booked out for weekends on end. But if you find a calendar that is decently booked up for the next 4 to 6 weeks, again, a brilliant, brilliant indication. If there's absolutely nothing in the calendar, you might just want to consider, is this a new property? How many reviews have they got? How long have they been listed for? As when you list a new property, it does take a little bit of time to build traction and start building up bookings. So that is the next thing essentially that I would do. So once you've done your market research and you've found a few focus areas now, it's going to be time to start looking for properties in those areas. So the most common and obvious ones, especially here in the UK, would be places like Rightmove, Zoopla, OpenRent, Gumtree, Facebook Marketplace. All of these platforms will have properties available to let. Rightmove, Zoopla, those sort of ones will usually go through a letting agent. In fact, I think in most cases go through a letting agent. OpenRent and Gumtree and Facebook usually will have the landlords marketing that property themselves. So with those platforms, you're going to go directly to a landlord and speak to them, which is an easier conversation to have because there's one less gatekeeper in the way. With Rightmove and Zoopla, of course, you're going to be passing through letting agents. So the usual thing that hundreds and if not thousands of people will do on rent to rent is they'll just shoot a message, really boring message on Rightmove or Zoopla to the letting agent, and it'll say something like, can I sublet this property? I want to Airbnb it. That is going to get you absolutely nowhere. You can try it, and believe me, you're not going to do anything. When we first started, those first 3 months, or the first 2 months at least, I was doing exactly that. I was putting these silly little messages together. I was even going on viewings and lying about what I was doing. I was pretending that I was going to be living there, and then on the viewing, I'd sort of surprise the letting agent and say, oh, I'd like to sublet this. And every time they would either just the joy would drain out of their face, or they'd be quite annoyed with me. And that is certainly not a good way to start building relationships with letting agents. You'll probably end up with a black market against your name. So I don't advise doing that. What I would advise doing is carefully, especially on OpenRent, Gumtree, Facebook, places like that, where it's direct to landlord. On there you can put a really decent message. Make sure it's not too lengthy, but you can put a decent message together if there's no telephone number available. Of course, always pick up the phone first, but if there's not one available, like for OpenRent, for example, I think you have to message first. Make sure that you put a decent message together. Let them know straight off the get-go what you're wanting to do with this property, which is sublet. Of course, don't use the word sublet. It'll be on a company let. And explain the benefits, which we'll go into in the next stage. Explain those benefits through that message. In an ideal world, you want the telephone number on there. You want to ring them up and speak to them and see how they're getting on with booking that, letting that property out. On there, that's where you'll do your pitch, which again, we'll go into the next step. But yeah, so those are that ones, letting agents. Now, you can call letting agents. They do get hundreds, and I speak to letting agents all the time. There's a lot that we work closely with. They do get hundreds of calls a day, if not thousands a week. You know, it is... They're driven crazy by it, and some letting agents will just say, no, we don't do this at all. I think over the last year, at least, a lot of them have come round to it. We had a lot of no's in the past where it was like they would never touch it. And now they've done a couple of properties on that basis. So I think a lot more people are becoming open-minded to it whilst they're understanding the strategy as well. And there's obviously a need in the market for it as well. So ringing letting agents up, you can do. Just bear in mind that you're going to face more rejection that way, but you can cover a lot of ground that way. You can make 100 calls a day if you wanted to. The best approach that has worked for us, and it's worked for us long term as well, is walking into the letting agent. If you walk into a letting agent, and bear in mind this is always on a high street, so it's a shop front, you walk in, there's people there, their customer service training means that they can't be rude to you. It's very difficult for people, and I think especially Brits, to be rude to each other. We can't do it. So and what we did in our early days was we walked into letting agents. We'd set out a couple of days or do a weekend or something, and we'd go between letting agents and we'd sit down with them and we'd say, hey, look, this is our company. This is what we do. This is where we're trying to get. These are the services we provide, and this is the offer or the benefits to you and the landlord. And sell that in and just have the conversation with them. If they've got the time, which in most cases they do, they'll have that chat with you. And the chances are, by you doing that, there's probably a handful of people that have done the same thing. Whereas people picking up the phone to them, that'll happen loads of times every single day, and they just become switched off to it. Think about the last time you got a sales call for whatever it was, solar panels or insurance or whatever it is. You just think, I want to get off this phone as quickly as possible. Whereas if someone comes and talks to you, there's a bit in your body that says, I can't be rude to you right now, so I'm going to be polite and chat to you. So that is the best thing. And the reason why I say that that's worked for us long term is because, well, we've had all those people that we've met have always called us back at one point or another. We've had people that we've met and never even done a deal with, but every few months they'll drop us a message like, will this work for you? Or I've got a landlord here that we can't help him with, but you guys might be able to. So even though we've not even done a deal with them and they understand how we work, because we've had that long-lasting effect on them of meeting them and showing them who our personalities are, they are still ringing us up and recommending business to us, which is more than you can ask for. Even if you're not getting a deal out of them straight away, it will pay back in the long term. So that's what you can do in terms of proactive research or proactive reach out to letting agents, landlords, that sort of thing. And finally, and what's helped us, I think, a couple of times in terms of getting deals is networking. So we've got it here, network. Now, ask absolutely everybody in your family, in your friendship group, ask anyone who's got a property. You'll be surprised how many landlords are actually out there. And it's always something like, oh, so-and-so's brothers, mum, sister, they've got a property and they're struggling to let it out. The tenant's just moved out, it's been empty for a month, and you've already got a relationship or rapport built with that person, and there's an element of trust there. So it's such an easier pitch. We've done this twice, I believe. So we've had a deal that's come through a relative and they were working their job. They were just at work and they had a conversation with someone else for the first time, and they were on about a property they'd just bought, and it got passed through that way. We picked a deal up that way. And another one through an ex-colleague who had a property. He was the landlord, he was having trouble with tenants, he'd had it in a void period, and it just so happened to land at the right time, and we took it on as a rent-to-rent. So we've had 2 deals through that method of just purely networking. So that is a really easy, if I was you getting started, that is the first thing that I would do, to ask around everyone. Who do we know that has got a property? Can we speak to them? And even if it just gives you an understanding of what a landlord's disadvantages are with long-term lets and things like that, you can understand and learn from them and use that information to go and pitch with other landlords and letting agents. So that is step 1. And we're gonna move on to step 2 now. So here we are at step 2. So negotiate with landlords. So let's say we have found that property and we've managed to get a conversation either with a letting agent or the landlord, and they are open to the idea of rent to rent. Well, the first thing that we want to be doing is creating a win-win offer. So what does this look like? Okay, well, the landlord at this moment in time is probably thinking to themselves, am I taking on a huge risk by doing this on a company, by letting multiple guests come through my property? Should I play it safe and just go with a long-term let? All these things are circulating in their mind. You've got to put yourself in the landlord's shoes, right? If you owned a property and it's bricks and mortar and they've put money and time and effort and energy into it, you know, are you just going to have it get trashed? And this is a big thing with Airbnb. Everyone knows about parties that have gone wrong and the property being absolutely damaged out, and it's just not, it's not been a good look for a lot of people. But those stories are massively publicized in the media because, well, that sells stories, right? It sells newspapers at the end of the day, and that's not really the case. 1,000 million nights that have been booked out on Airbnb have gone super smoothly. You know, 99.9% of people's stays have gone really well and they've enjoyed the property. And I always find it funny because people will use services like Airbnb and Booking.com to go stay in a property or in a hotel, and they don't go trash the room. So I think it's just this big sort of misconception that Airbnb equals parties. And of course, that's not the case, right? So the first thing, when that is usually the first thing that comes up. And what we say straight away to combat that, and this is with letting agents and landlords, is we don't allow for one night stays. So if someone books the property for one night, I'm not saying the chances are that they're going to have a party, but there's a higher chance, right? There's a higher chance that they're going to have a party. We don't accept one night bookings at all. We just don't do it. Financially or commercially for us, it doesn't really make sense anyway, because once you've paid the cleaning company, they're not charging any less for a one night stay. Once you've paid them, you don't really walk away with a lot. So it never really makes sense. And you just get difficult guests as well. So they'll usually just fly through, leave it in a state and get themselves off. So we don't want to do that. And the other thing with that is you are competing against hotels. So hotels offer one night stays, let them do it, right? They've got housekeepers on site, their costs are low, they can keep them low, and we can't compete, but we also don't want to compete with them. So 2-night minimum stay is what we recommend through and through. So that's what we're going to be saying. We're going to be saying that we don't let people stay for 2 nights, and maybe you don't even want to bring up the 2-night stay. You might want to say that we have people stay for weeks or months. Of course, you know, you're not going to have someone that's just going to party for a month straight through. And so it just puts them at ease a little bit. It puts a landlord at ease to say, okay, so this is actually going to be just maybe a few people a year, so not different people every single week. So that's the first thing you want to say to combat these. Now, when we talk about a win-win offer, there's plenty of benefits that a landlord's going to be gaining by having a company let or having a rent-to-rent business in there when compared to a long-term let. So one of those things would be, or in fact, if I break it down into the 3 things that we say, then you can take that and use it with your conversations that you have with landlords. So firstly, professional cleaning. So they're always going to say, oh, my property's going to be damaged, people are coming and going and they won't care about it and that sort of thing. Well, actually, when you take a step back and you can even say to the landlord, well, look, put yourself in our shoes. At the end of the day, we're running a commercial business here. Our product is your property and we are going to stage it and make sure that it looks really attractive and appealing for guests. You know, it's going to be in our best interest to make sure that that property looks the way that it looks on day 1, on day 101. So how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to have a professional cleaning team. Now, every single time a guest leaves the property, the cleaners will go in, they'll change over all the bedding, of course, they'll do a full deep clean of the property, and any maintenance, little things that might not be working well, they're going to report back to us immediately, and we're going to resolve that issue. So small maintenance jobs, either we'll go in and sort ourselves, the cleaners might do it, or we'll phone up a maintenance man or a handyman to go and sort it out. So you're not, as a landlord, you're not going to be bogged down with these silly little jobs that a long-term tenant would do. And you'd really be surprised what long-term tenants ask their landlords to do for them. And I'm talking about things like changing a light bulb or unblocking a toilet. These are literally the menial tasks that long-term lets will ask their landlords to do for them. those will be completely wiped for them. So landlords, there'll be very rare occasions where you'll have to get in touch with your landlord to report issues. We've had some of our properties for over 3 years now, and I think I could probably maybe name one instance where I've had to call the landlord to report a problem, and that's something like a leak. And you know, you need to let them know, and they can sort it out, and at least, you know, there's no cost on you as a rent-to-rent business. But that's it, you know. So you can really create a nice, peaceful environment for your landlord. And if they've had bad tenants in the past, long-term lets, they may well be, that may be very appealing to them. So professional cleaning, maintenance, things like that is all going to be taken care of by you, by your business. Okay, so that's one thing. Secondly, you could say that you want to take this lease on over a longer period of time. A long-term let will usually take it on for 12 months. I don't know many situations where a renter will say, I want this for 3 years. Okay, because the beauty of being a renter is either you're moving around or you're saving up. You don't want to be locked in for more than 12 months. So there's going to be a lot of instances where landlords have had tenants back to back to back, and it's been 12-month blocks. Now, 12 months sounds like a long period of time, but actually it's not. It comes around very quickly. And so, yeah, the landlord will be thinking, okay, I don't want to have to change tenants every 12 months. Can I get someone in longer? What we offer to all of our landlords, in the early stages of when we started doing rent to rent 3-4 years ago now, we took on 12-month tenancies. The only reason we did that was because this model was really new at the time. We weren't experienced, and so we wanted to mitigate that risk. I would not really touch a tenancy now for 12 months because I want longevity in the deal. So it's great for us as well. You've got to remember, this is your business. Commercially, you want to be able to forecast out for years to come. So we now take tenancies on between 3 to 5 years. I think 5 years is the longest you can do for some particular reason, but it's normally 3 to 5 years. The landlords are very, very happy with that. So yeah, between 3 to 5 years is what you want to be taking that on, and that's a massive positive for the landlord, because usually what happens at the end of a 12-month tenancy for a long-term let is there'll be maintenance issues that tenant hadn't reported the whole way through, and it will have just got worse and worse and worse, and it probably would have been a much less of a headache if they just sorted it out and reported it when it came about. The tenants just, you know, it's not their property, so they don't care. They let things get run down, there's wear and tear, there's all these sort of things that after a tenant leaves, they usually leave it in a bad state. They lose their deposit, but they don't really care anyway, and the landlord's got to go in, pay money to get these problems fixed. They're then going to have a void period. So unless it's a super high demand area and they can get a tenant in and out within a week or two, they're going to have a void period of at least a month. Okay, so that's 1 month where their mortgage, if they've got a mortgage on that property, it's not going to be getting paid, and they're not earning any money from it either. So, and this could roll on, right? There's certain markets in the UK, and you might not believe this, but there's certain markets where they're actually overpopulated with rental units, and they're struggling to get them let out. I've spoken to landlords in Leeds City Centre in the last 6 months where they've had an empty property, brand new empty property, state of the art, and it's been empty for over a year because they've not managed to find a tenant. So these areas do exist. It's not just the whole thing. There's not enough rental units for renters in certain areas. That there absolutely is. So for a landlord, if they've got a void period, that's like a big no-no for them. They want that mortgage covered. Usually these landlords own a few properties, and so if that mortgage isn't covered, that's coming out of their own pocket, and they usually just have a 9 to 5 like you will. So it's a great thing for you to be offering them a longer lease. So that's number 2. And thirdly, what you want to be talking about in this win-win offer is your rights as a company let. So tenants, long-term tenants, and after the Renters' Rights Bill in 2025 for the UK, tenants have an abundance of rights. It is now very, very difficult to evict a tenant who's not paying, right? If you've got a bad tenant, and this is only for bad tenants, of course, if you've got a terrible tenant that's in your property, you know that they're trashing it, you know that they are ghosting you and the landlord can't get hold of them and they're not paying the rent, that is a massive problem for a landlord, because they're going from 6 months to 12 months, whether they've got to go through court proceedings, which is really expensive. They're not earning anything. And when you go through court, you're paying all this money up front to just get a tenant out. You're not getting any money out of it. It's just to get a tenant out, get your property back. Usually comes damaged because they trash the place before they leave, and you've got all these headaches and problems. That's with an AST, an assured short hold tenancy. With a company let, it is so much different. There's things in there that make it fair, of course, but we have way less rights. And depending on how that contract is shaped up, if, for example, with us on ours, on the contract that we use and we supply within our academy, the contract that we use is really fair, and we set out that if we stop paying rent for a certain period of time, they have a notice period of X to kick us out. And you know, we're totally fine. We want to promote this to landlords because at the end of the day, it's their property, right? And if we're not paying rent on time and we're missing payments and we're ghosting them, then that makes us a terrible tenant, and we're not a terrible business. We want to be seen as a positive business, and we believe in ourselves, and we know that we're gonna make sure that the landlord is paid on time. So that's the third thing. So you want to be saying that as a company let, by taking this company let agreement over an AST, you actually have way more rights as a landlord than we do as your tenant. Okay, so that's a third thing that you can say within this win-win offer. So the next thing on here is low startup costs. So this really plays into the negotiation part with the landlord. So if we've created that win-win offer for them, they're bought in on the idea now. Those objections that they had, or those misconceptions, are all put to bed. They're now thinking, okay, well, how can I work with this person? How can I make the most money out of them? Of course, this is a commercial deal at the end of the day. Everyone's here to make money. So what we want to do is try to achieve these low startup costs. That's great for us because it means that we can scale quicker. We've got more money in the pot. And so we almost need to re-educate the landlord that, okay, you're getting a great deal here because you're choosing us over a long-term tenant. But we can't forget that this is a business deal and it needs to work for us as well. So the landlord may be under the impression that they want us to put a deposit in. So a deposit for an AST at the moment, I think is about 5 to 6 weeks. So it's about a month and a bit worth of rent. That gets put in, it doesn't have to for a company let actually, but it gets put in a deposit scheme. On a commercial let, it doesn't have to. So on an AST it does, and it's locked away. And that's covered by certain insurances and things like that. Commercial let doesn't, it can just sit in the landlord's bank account. So it'll sit in there. The landlord will be earning interest off of that deposit, which is great for them. Not massive amount, but also it's not secured. So if the landlord decides that they're going to go spend that and they were never going to give it back to you anyway, you haven't got much of a leg to stand on. We want to negotiate that deposit out of the deal. In our 5 years of doing Airbnb, we have paid one deposit, and it was the first deal that we ever did, and it's still in there now. Luckily, it's not a lot of money. I think it's about £600-700 that's locked away, and we'll get that when we one day walk away from that deal. But yeah, that was the only time that we did it, and we stopped straight after that one on the second deal. The reason we do that is because it locks up so much capital, which prevents you from moving on to the next deal and scaling. So we want to avoid deposits at all costs. We've got certain ones now where we'll do a week. So if our rent is something like £1,500, I think the week's deposit will be like 300 quid or less. So I don't mind those ones so much, but if we had given in and given all the deposits that we've been asked of, we probably have about £20,000 to £30,000 sat in multiple bank accounts that we're not able to access until we leave these properties. That's a no-go. That really stops us from growing. It stops you from scaling. Terrible. We don't want deposits. Even if we can get out of a week, you know, that'd be amazing. So what do? We try and just say, look, we don't do deposits. It stops us from scaling. We're really interested in growing our business here. If you've got more properties, we want to take those on. We want to take them on sooner. We say that. Let's see what the landlord says at that point. What we could do is they might be unsure if you've not worked with them before or if you've not experienced this model before. So what we could offer them is maybe a couple of months rent up front. A few occasions we've done 3 months rent up front. So it wasn't for the one deal that I'm thinking of, it wasn't a lot. It was around about $12.50 a month. So we just paid 3 months in a chunk, which was great because it relieves you a little bit for the next couple of months. You've spent a lot of money on furniture, so not having to pay rent for the next couple of months is good while you build up reviews on Airbnb. Another one that we've done is we have done 2 months rent up front, and then we got a relief 6 months down the line. So that was basically the landlord had never done this strategy before, and he thought, okay, I'll give it 6 months. If not, you know, your rent is surrendered and I'll give you that back. And we actually continued and basically just gave us a month for free. And so it all worked out in the end. So yeah, there's a few different ways you can do it to try and avoid, but you don't want capital locked up. Borrowing from yourself in the future is fine. That's not an issue. We can work that into the deal, but you don't want your capital locked up in someone else's bank account earning money for them. You want it to earn money for you. So that's what we're going to do with low startup costs. Another thing that we can add in here is something called a grace period. So a grace period is where you will essentially take the keys for the property but not start paying until a certain time period further on. So this would be like a grace period, and the usual one's like 2 weeks to a month. The way that we're gonna sell this into the landlord is say, hey, look, there's a load of benefits here that you're getting. It takes us a bit of time to set up, so actually we're not even gonna be running this property as an Airbnb for at least 2 or 3 weeks now. We've got to order furniture. It's gonna take 3 weeks for a sofa and bed to show up. So we're not actually earning any money. Can we work out a bit of a grace period where we're gonna start decorating? We're not actually gonna be running business from here. Usual landlords, you know, if you're taking this property on for 3 years, you know, an extra month in a void for them is not a massive deal. So yeah, you can negotiate that in. A grace period is just a really, really easy way to alleviate a little bit of the setup cost. At the end of the day, you're gonna have to pay in 2 weeks to a month anyway, but it just allows you to do that setup period. You might be surprised how long it takes you to get set up. If you haven't planned the setup well, you could be waiting on furniture, waiting for painters and decorators, handymen if you've got to do a little bit of work to it and stuff. So just bear that in mind and try and work with the landlord to get that grace period as well. So we've done the win-win offer, we've done the startup cost now, the low profit. That is going to produce a high profit margin. So by having all of these and producing a high profit margin, essentially what that's going to be doing is giving us a reduced business risk. So the aim of the game is to negotiate with the landlord by giving them that win-win offer, having low startup costs, less capital locked away, and that total into a high profit margin. So by having a great property that has high occupancy and a high nightly rate, and we're getting a reduced business risk. So the more money we're earning out of a single property is essentially going to be great for us because there's less chance of it becoming a loss. So that is basically step 2, and then we will move on to step 3. So lastly, the final step in this whole process is stage and market your property for success. So when we're talking about success, what we're actually talking about is understanding your target audience, okay? So in step 1, we spoke a little bit about tourists, business contractors, that sort of thing. And this really comes into this final stage here, and it's understanding who your target market is. So again, going back to it, the way that we would furnish a property that was based in a tourist hotspot would be so different than what it would be for like a business contractor. So tourist hotspots, we want to talk about things and we want to add in amenities that really add to their trip. Okay, so things like that might be coffee machines, it might be, if it's a large property with a garden, it might be outdoor cooking, like a barbecue and a place to sit and eat outdoors. It could be a bunch of things, pool table, that sort of thing. So, and on the flip side of that actually as well, with business contractors and that audience, it might be a desk, a workspace where if they're working there remotely or if they're coming home after work and they need to do something, then having a space where they can get a laptop out and work comfortably as well. So there's a ton of different things that you can do to really cater to your audience. And the best way to do this is to look at other properties in the area and see what those ones are doing and how they're catering and how maybe you can improve those amenities. So yeah, so that's the first thing we want to have in mind, okay? There's a huge misconception with people getting into Airbnb where they think they can throw any old terrible furniture into a property, bang it on Airbnb, and it'll turn over a load of money for them. Doesn't happen anymore. 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, yes, you could have done that and you would have made decent money. It's just not the game anymore. At the end of the day, this market is becoming very saturated, but it's becoming saturated with a load of crap. If you can operate at that sort of 5 to 10% echelon, then you are going to be set up for success, and this is how we're going to achieve it. So with your staging, there's a few different points here that I want to talk about. Firstly, make sure it has a bit of a boutique feel, okay? So with that, and what we want to kind of go into is, don't be cheap. So in our first 2 properties, or our first deal actually, 3-4 years ago now, we got the Airbnb, we got the property, we had limited funds. It was around £3,000 after we'd done a deposit and rent on that one. We were left with about 1,600 quid, and we've told this story a few times now, but that £1,600 had to fully furnish a 1-bedroom apartment, okay? And we're talking everything: bed, sofa, TV, kitchen, dining area, all that sort of stuff. We really made that money stretch. In hindsight, there's a few different things we could have done, maybe put a little bit of it finance as well through like IKEA or something. But yeah, we've stretched that money out, and what happened was we bought a load of cheap furniture and it all broke within less than 6 months, and we had to replace it anyway. So it was money down the drain. The main things that you want to focus on and not cheap out on is the furniture that gets used the most. So I'm talking dining chairs and table, sofa, bed, right? So these items that are getting a lot of use, they need to be robust. So make sure, if you're going to spend the money or you're trying to budget, make sure you spend the money on those items there that are getting touched a lot. So make sure it has a bit of a boutique feel. Think about hotels, you know, who's your competition around the area? As long as it feels nice and clean and it's not flimsy, then that's a sort of the route that you want to be achieving. With high functionality then, this is about, and going back to your target audience, this is about making sure that property works for that audience, okay? So I know we mentioned about like coffee machines and maybe outdoor dining, outdoor seating, things like that. And then for business contractors, desks and stuff, or maybe for if it was like a project-based area, so you're having a lot of contractors in one property. So if it's a large property, how can you fit the most amount of beds in there? But let's say you've got a property, and I've seen this happen before, there'll be 6 beds, you know, 6 single beds, so you can get 6 guys in there, but then a table that will only serve 2 people. You know, where's everyone supposed to eat? They're not going to go and eat on the end of their bed. Can you get some guys on the sofa? Can you get them on the dining table? Is there maybe a little island in the kitchen? Something like that. Think about how this property is realistically going to work for people. If there's 6 guys and 1 bathroom, you might want to bring that occupation amount down a little bit, maybe to 4 people. So just consider things when you're putting it in, because these are going to flag up in reviews. What we like to do is either stay in the property ourselves before it goes live, or have family or friends stay in the property for one night and let them feed back to you before you put it on Airbnb and list it. That's a great way to get feedback and figure things out that you wouldn't have even thought of. Especially with your first couple of properties, there's going to be stuff that you miss. So it's great getting that feedback in before it can come up in a review and potentially a negative review for you. Finally, we want to look at attention to detail. So with attention to detail, this again leads on to the review point. If there's certain things, and you'll notice this as you're setting the property up, and even if you stay a night, you'll notice there's certain bits that it's like, that's probably going to break, or something's going to go wrong there, or, you know, how can I make this process easier for the guests? You could go into, you could dive into a ton of things. One thing that's super common, the first thing that a guest wants to know when they arrive at a property usually is, what's a Wi-Fi password? So when you'll set up a property, and we've had it loads of times, you know, you get the router and you set the Wi-Fi up, and it comes up with this super long, complicated password where you get it wrong the first time, maybe the second time before you eventually log on. Think about how you can make connecting to the Wi-Fi as easy as possible. You know, so this is just one example, but maybe you could put that Wi-Fi password into a QR code. They walk in through the front door, scan it immediately, or even just change the password so it's something easy and memorable. So there's a few different things, but dive into each area. You know, think about when you're in the bedroom. Okay, well, if this is a tourist area, they're going to want maybe a bit of a getting ready space. You know, a full length mirror, all that sort of stuff. So think about how you live and how you get on in life, and maybe take it up a notch and think sort of extra things that a guest would really appreciate. So that has served us really well in our time in some of our properties in Harrogate, where it is mainly tourism. Hollie's done this. I would have never thought about it, but Hollie's put together little getting ready stations. So In the bedroom, that we're quite fortunate that the bedrooms are massive. So we've got little getting ready stations where there's a full length mirror, there's plug sockets for hair curlers and hair dryers, and a little stand where you can put your makeup there, and you'll have cotton pads and that sort of thing. So it's just going that extra mile. This will 100% come back to you in the reviews. So if you haven't got anything, then it's really basic. That will show up in the reviews. If you've thought of everything, or as much as you can add in, that will also come up in reviews in a positive light. The more reviews you get, the more 5 stars, the higher up in Airbnb's algorithm that you're going to appear, which is going to lead to more bookings and a higher nightly rate. So that can really be changed in this area here. So finally here, or second to finally, invest in professional photos. We didn't do this for the first 2 years of running our rent to rent business. I think we got to about 7 or 8 properties before we invested in a professional photographer. We were just always under the impression, I thought it was half decent at taking pictures, and I look back at them now and it's hilarious. We thought that we were saving a bunch of cash because the photographer that we've got now, we pay around about just shy of £300 per property for these pictures. That feels like a massive expense, especially when you've spent thousands furnishing this property. So the reality of it is you're going to make that back in one booking. Chances are you're going to make that £300 back in your first booking anyway. Spend the money. I cannot advise you enough to get a professional photographer in. And when you're searching for these professional photographers, make sure that they have experience in doing property as a minimum. If they're a specialist in Airbnb or holiday let photography, amazing, that's great news. But professional photography will just elevate your listing on the platforms. It will make it shine amongst the rest. Trust me on this one. So that's a huge important factor there. And then lastly, you want to think about marketing strategically, okay? So in this area, and I've done another video on this about optimizing your listing. So we want to deep dive into every single area and aspect of how to build out your listing. We want to go in there, make sure that we're adding all the amenities in, we're listing all that, we're listing information on where the nearest car park is. We're walking through the photo tour on Airbnb and making sure that the actual tour lines up with how you would go through the property and showing your best images first. So that's one of those. The other thing is price labs, for example, or using dynamic pricing. So you want to make sure that you get that pricing strategy right. Again, I've done another walkthrough in a separate YouTube video here about price labs or pricing strategy. So you want to make sure that you get that spot on. And then lastly, be proactive, be creative about how you market this. We've done a ton of different things to try and generate bookings for our properties. To name a few, we've walked into estate agents, or if we've already got contact with a letting agent, we've said, hey, by the way, if you've got a scenario where someone's sold their house and they've got a period of time in between before they move into the next place, have them stay with us. Insurance companies do this as well. Let's say someone's house has been flooded and they need to move out for 2 months. Their insurance company will pay us for their accommodation. It's not even coming out of their pocket. We approached companies and said, we've got accommodation down the road from you here. And they've turned around and said, hey, well, that's great because we have different guys coming up for projects all the time. We'll put them in touch with you. We've had one where we've contacted a local theatre who have these massive performances on. And guess what? They need the tourists that are coming somewhere to stay. So they will recommend us for their guests to stay. So there's so many different ways. Think outside the box. Just by listing on Airbnb and Booking.com might not always be the quickest way to generate bookings. It does take a little bit of time to get going and get to that occupancy rate. So think about other ways that you can try and attract your guests into the property. So yeah, so that kind of caps off the stage your marketing part, and yeah. And that is exactly how we got to where we are now, earning 20k profit every single month.
What we learned over the last 5 years is if we build systems and automate the business, we can take on as many properties as we want whilst only working a couple of hours a week.
Think of this like McDonald's. It's exactly the same wherever you go in the world. Because the systems and processes are so good, you're getting the same experience every single time. You could literally put any worker into McDonald's with zero experience and you will get the same results.
So what we thought was, how can we create systems for our rent-to-rent business so we can take on as many properties as we like without adding any extra work?
So if you've got to the end of this video and you're thinking that you would like to start a rent-to-rent business, maybe just for a little bit of extra income, or perhaps you're looking to quit your 9-to-5 job and travel the world like we have done. Well, we can work with you on a one-to-one basis to get your rent-to-rent business to £3,000 in profit every single month. Then we're going to lay the foundations to ensure that you can scale that business up to £10,000 in profit every single month. Message us Rent to Rent on Instagram and we'll have a chat with you to see if we can help you. Click on the link below where you can book in a call with us.